Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Welcome back for another deep dive with us. This time, we're heading back to the 1960s.
Oh, the 60s.
That's a decade known for, well, massive upheaval. And we're going to be exploring the rise and fall of the New Left movement.
Yeah.
Using an excerpt from Mr. Hutchings' History as our guide.
I think listeners are going to find this one pretty interesting because it wasn't just like your typical protest movement. The New Left, they really wanted to fundamentally reshape American society, its values, its priorities, you name it.
Like a total reset.
Pretty much.
Okay, so let's just start with some basics here.
Yeah.
When we say, New Left,
Right.
what exactly makes them so new?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I mean, obviously there were leftist movements before this, right?
Yeah, so you had the old left,
Okay.
which was, very tied to communist ideology. The New Left, now they were different. They were born out of this, disillusionment with Cold War politics, man.
Yeah.
And all the, the old power structure. They were mainly college students. And they were demanding a more participatory democracy, more social justice. And huge thing, of course, they were totally opposed to the Vietnam War.
So it's like this generation that's saying, hey, we're not buying what you're selling anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they were looking for something different, something more authentic.
Yeah.
And you can really see that in one of their key documents, the Port Huron Statement. This was drafted in 1962 by Students for a Democratic Society, SDS.
So their mission statement.
Precisely, yeah. It was a powerful critique of inequality and militarism and corporate power, all the things they saw as hindering, a truly just and democratic society. They wanted a society that valued individual autonomy and social justice.
Wow.
Pretty bold statement coming from a bunch of students.
It really does kind of throw down the gauntlet. Yeah. Shows how serious they were about challenging those existing power structures. But, I mean, they didn't just talk the talk, did they?
Oh, no, not at all. They definitely took action.
Yep.
And they were actually inspired by the tactics of the civil rights movement.
Okay.
Using things like sit-ins and freedom rides to make their voices heard. And don't forget, this was also a time of those massive anti-war protests, right? The March on Washington in 1965, that's a perfect example.
Yeah.
There was real energy there, a momentum in those early years.
So you have this, surge of activism, all these young people demanding change.
Right.
How did the U.S. government react to all of this?
Well, to put it simply, they saw the New Left as a threat.
Yeah.
And they decided to try and suppress it.
Okay.
And they used a multi-pronged approach. And one of the tactics they used, and this might surprise you, was COINTELPRO.
COINTELPRO, what's that?
It was a covert FBI program.
Really?
I mean, truly covert. Surveillance, infiltration, even disinformation. To disrupt these groups, discredit them. It was all about, sowing chaos and distrust within the movement.
Wow, sneaky.
It really was. And on top of that, they also they used legal action as well.
Oh, okay.
To try and bog down the movement's leaders.
Right, yeah.
The Chicago 8 trial back in 1969, that's a classic example.
Yeah.
Became this huge media circus, draining resources, distracting from the message.
Yeah.
So the government was trying to, dismantle the New Left from the outside.
Right.
But there were also these challenges brewing from within the movement itself.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's get into that. How did these internal divisions emerge? What did they actually look like?
By the late 1960s,
Okay.
the New Left had become, it was pretty fragmented. Different factions started popping up, each with their own ideologies, their own approaches. Right. And this made it a lot harder to present a united front,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So break it down for us.
What were some of these factions and what were their core beliefs?
Well, one of the shifts was what some might call the countercultural turn.
Okay.
Some groups Up Against the Wall Motherfers.
Okay.
They embraced the whole hippie counterculture, man.
Yeah.
They were more focused on personal liberation and communal living than traditional political activism.
So less about changing the system,
Yeah.
more about changing yourself and your immediate community.
Exactly. And then you also had groups like the Crazies.
Okay.
And they were all about anarchy.
Yeah.
They wanted decentralized, leaderless structures, essentially believing that any form of hierarchy, was oppressive.
Right.
Anarchy, in a nutshell, is the idea that society can function without, top-down control, relying instead on voluntary cooperation, mutual aid.
So a real mix of ideologies starting to emerge within the movement.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And it gets even more complex because there were also, factions like progressive labor.
Right.
And they actually wanted to return to more like traditional Marxist-Leninist ideology.
Wow. So a very different approach.
Yeah, very different. And this, this created friction with those who rejected authoritarianism.
Sure.
They saw it as incompatible with the new left's vision of participatory democracy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it sounds like things are getting pretty tense within the movement at this point.
It was. And then you had the Weathermen on the far end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
They believed that peaceful protests just weren't effective. And that the only way to achieve real change was through violent revolution. They were responsible for, bombings of government buildings, including the U.S. Capitol in 1971.
Wow.
These actions, of course, alienated a lot of people.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And it kind of just reinforced the public's fear that the movement had become too radical,
So we've got all this internal pressure, these conflicting ideologies.
Yeah.
But there were also some pretty big external factors, right?
That
contributed to the New Left's decline.
Oh, absolutely.
Things were changing in the broader political and social landscape, too.
Yeah. I mean, the times they were a-changin', as the song goes.
Exactly.
One of the biggest changes was President Nixon's decision to end the draft in '73.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I mean, the draft was massively unpopular, right?
Oh, yeah.
A major rallying point for the anti-war movement.
For sure.
Ending it would definitely take the wind out of their sails.
It did. It did.
Yeah.
And then there's this other trend that I find really fascinating.
Okay.
It was this turn towards spirituality and communal living. Among a lot of disillusioned activists, they sought solace in things like transcendental meditation.
Okay.
And some even turned to, believe it or not, Christian evangelism. It was like this retreat from political activism. They were searching for meaning and purpose in a world that felt increasingly chaotic.
Yeah, it's almost like the idealism of the movement, which burned so brightly early on, was starting to fizzle out.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Actually, Tom Hayden, who we talked about earlier, a prominent SDS figure.
Right.
He said something that really captures this sentiment.
Okay.
He said, and I quote, "There is a race going on between religion and revolution to capture people's minds, and I'm afraid we are losing to the occult."
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a powerful statement.
It is.
It really does speak to that sense of disillusionment that was kind of setting in.
It does.
Yeah.
Speaking of disillusionment, I think it's worth circling back to the Weathermen for a minute.
Okay, yeah.
They really embody this, this tragic arc of idealism turned to extremism.
Yeah, they went from protesting the war to basically declaring war on the U.S. government.
Exactly.
It's a pretty dramatic shift.
It is. It is. And their tactics, things like the Days of Rage in Chicago in '69, they were designed to be shocking, disruptive. They were trying to provoke a reaction, expose what they saw as the inherent violence of the state.
So in their bombing campaign, targeting like symbols of American power.
Yeah.
Like the Pentagon, the State Department. That was all, that was all part of this strategy of provoking a revolution.
Yeah. They believed that these actions would spark a wider uprising, that the masses would rise up and overthrow the government.
Okay.
But instead, they just alienated a huge part of the population.
Yeah.
And further fueled this perception that the new left was dangerous and out of control.
So a classic case of extremism backfiring.
Yeah, pretty much. They were so convinced of their own, righteousness. That they failed to gauge the public's reaction.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's a cautionary tale, really.
It is.
A reminder that even the most, passionate idealism can be corrupted by violence.
For sure.
And that the ends never justify the means.
Right, right.
And it's also a reminder that public perception matters.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
When a movement loses the support of the people, it loses its power.
Yeah, it's over.
Okay, so we've seen how, government actions, internal divisions, even cultural shifts contributed to the New Left's decline.
Yeah.
But the story doesn't just end there, does it?
No, not at all.
I mean, how do historians view the New Left today?
That's a great question.
Is it just a footnote in history?
Yeah.
Or did it actually leave a lasting impact?
Well, the answer, like with most things in history, is complex and nuanced.
Okay.
There are a variety of perspectives, on the New Left's legacy.
Okay.
Both positive and negative.
So let's unpack some of those perspectives.
Sure.
Where do historians generally land on the spectrum of total failure to transformative movement?
Well, on one end of the spectrum, you've got progressive historians.
Okay.
They tend to focus on the New Left's achievements.
Okay.
They point to its role in ending the Vietnam War, advancing civil rights.
Okay.
They argue that, despite its ultimate fragmentation, the New Left had this profound impact on American society, pushing the country towards a more just, equitable future.
So they see it as a force for positive change, even if it didn't achieve all of its goals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they also highlight the fact that, a lot of the issues that the New Left championed are still relevant today.
Yeah, for sure.
Think about the fight for economic justice, racial equality, environmental protection.
These are all,
Yeah, these are all issues that were central to the New Left's agenda, and they continue to be, at the forefront of social and political discourse.
Yeah, it's like they were planting seeds that are still bearing fruit today.
Yeah.
Even if they didn't live to see the full harvest.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
That's a good one. One of the key figures in this progressive reappraisal of the New Left is historian Maurice Eiserman.
Oh.
And he argues that their emphasis on participatory democracy had a lasting impact on American political discourse.
Okay, so how has that participatory democracy idea kind of played out in the years since the New Left?
Well, I mean, think about how town hall meetings and online forums have become so central to political discourse. That emphasis on citizen participation, giving ordinary people a voice, in the decision-making process. That has roots in the New Left's vision. They wanted to empower people, make democracy more than just, casting a vote every few years.
So even though they didn't achieve a complete overhaul of the system, they did manage to shift the conversation in some pretty important ways.
They did. But of course, there are also critics of the New Left, particularly from a more conservative perspective.
Okay.
They tend to highlight the movement's radicalism, its association with violence.
Okay.
They see the New Left as this fringe movement, detached from mainstream American values, a cautionary tale about the dangers of utopian idealism and revolutionary zeal.
So for them, the New Left represents this dangerous extremism that threatened to undermine the very fabric of American society.
That's how they see it.
Okay.
Yeah, figures like William F. Buckley Jr., a leading voice of the conservative movement. He was highly critical of the New Left. He saw it as a symptom of a broader cultural decline, a rejection of traditional morality.
So we have these two very different interpretations of the New Left.
Yeah.
One that emphasizes its positive contributions, the other that focuses on its negative aspects.
Yeah.
Are there any other perspectives worth considering?
Absolutely. Cultural historians, for example.
Yeah.
They offer a different lens in which to view the movement. They're interested in the relationship between the New Left and the counterculture.
Okay.
And they argue that this relationship was both symbiotic and ultimately problematic.
So how did the counterculture both help and hinder the New Left?
Right. It seems like a bit of a paradox.
Yeah.
It is. Well, on the one hand, the counterculture provided fertile ground for New Left ideas to take root. The emphasis on on individual liberation, challenging social norms, traditional authority.
Okay.
You know, that resonated with a lot of young people who were also drawn to the New Left's vision of, you know, more just and equitable society.
So the counterculture kind of provided a cultural context for the New Left to thrive in.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
But on the other hand, cultural historians argue that the counterculture's focus on personal liberation sometimes overshadowed the New Left's political goals. The emphasis on individual experience and self-discovery could lead to a kind of, you know, political apathy. The sense that changing oneself was more important than changing the world.
So the counterculture's emphasis on individualism might have actually undermined the New Left's, like, collective goals.
Yeah, that's the argument.
Wow.
And it's a reminder that even movements with, you know, with shared goals can be pulled in different directions by competing values and priorities.
That's a really insightful point.
Yeah.
It highlights the complexities of social movements, you know, the way they can be both, like, unified and fragmented at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. And
there's one more perspective that I find fascinating, though it's a bit more niche.
Okay.
Some psychohistorians suggest that the New Left's radicalism might be linked to the psychological impact of growing up during the Cold War.
Okay.
They argue that the constant fear of nuclear annihilation, the sense that the world could end at any moment, could fuel a sense of urgency, and a desire for drastic change.
I mean, that makes sense, right?
Yeah, it's like if you grow up believing that the future is uncertain, you're more likely to embrace, like, radical ideas, and to be kind of impatient with incremental change.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. It's a reminder that historical events don't just shape, you know, the world around us. They shape our inner worlds. Our hopes, our fears, our very sense of who we are.
It's pretty profound when you think about it that way.
It is.
It really is. It's fascinating to think about how those big historical forces, like, shape individual lives and mindsets.
It is.
But zooming back out for a sec, even though the New Left ultimately, you know, fragmented and declined, it seems like its impact is still being felt today, wouldn't you say?
Oh, I definitely would.
So what would you say are some of the key takeaways from its legacy?
Well, I think one of the most significant things is its transformative impact on how we think about power. You know, their critique of corporate power, government overreach, the military-industrial complex, all of that. That paved the way for, you know, later movements like Occupy Wall Street. They were raising issues that are still so relevant today.
So in a way, their ideas lived on.
Yeah.
Even if the movement itself didn't.
I think that's a good way to put it. They shifted the conversation. And those echoes, you know, they're still reverberating.
And what about their emphasis on social justice?
You
know, racial equality, gender equality, LGBTQ rights.
Huge influence.
I mean,
it paved the way for the rise of intersectional feminism. You know, this framework that recognizes the interconnectedness of various forms of oppression.
You know, for our listeners who might not be familiar with that term, could you break down exactly what intersectionality means?
Sure. Intersectionality is it's the idea that we don't experience oppression in isolation. You know, our identities, race, gender, sexual orientation, class, all of it. It all intersects, shapes our experiences. So, for example, a Black woman, you know, she might face discrimination that's different.
From both a white woman and a Black man, just because of how those identities intersect.
That makes a lot of sense.
So
the New Left, even if unintentionally, they helped lay the groundwork for this more nuanced understanding of how oppression actually works.
I think they definitely contributed to it.
Okay.
And this focus on intersectionality, it's still shaping social justice movements today. The New Left helped us see that the fight for equality, it's not just about individual rights. It's about, you know, dismantling these systems of power that create and perpetuate inequality.
That's a powerful legacy.
It is.
But, you know, we've also talked about the New Left's its failures, the internal divisions, the the turn toward violence by some factions.
Yeah.
What lessons can we learn from those missteps?
Well, I think the New Left story, it serves as a cautionary tale, really.
About the importance of unity and strategic thinking in any social movement.
So it's not enough to just be, angry or to have the right ideas.
No.
You need a plan, a way to channel that energy into effective action.
You got to have a strategy.
Yeah.
And the fragmentation of the New Left, it reminds us that internal divisions, they can be just as destructive as external opposition.
Yeah.
When a movement loses its cohesion, it loses its power.
Yeah. And what about the Weathermen?
Right.
And their turn towards violence. What lessons can we draw from their experience?
Well, their story, I think it's a tragic example of how good intentions can go astray.
Right.
I mean, they were so convinced that the system was just, irredeemably corrupt that they felt violence was the only option. But their actions just, they alienated potential allies.
Right.
And ultimately just backfired, discrediting the movement in the eyes of many.
It's a reminder that violence rarely, if ever, leads to lasting positive change.
I agree.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that building a more just and equitable world, it requires patience, strategy, and a willingness to engage in dialogue, even with those who hold different views.
Yeah, those are all really important points.
Yeah.
So I guess as we kind of wrap up our deep dive here into the rise and fall of the New Left, what's one key question you think our listeners should take away from this conversation?
Well, I think the most important question is, how do we learn from both the successes and the failures of past social movements to create meaningful change in our own time?
That's a great question.
I mean, the challenges that the New Left grappled with, social injustice, economic inequality, abuse of power.
Right.
They're all, they're still with us today.
Yeah.
Their story offers valuable lessons for anyone who wants to build a better future.
It's like they were handing us a torch.
Yeah.
Urging us to carry it forward and light the way.
I like that.
And it's up to us to figure out how to keep that flame burning brightly.
Yeah.
Without letting it burn out of control.
Right.
Well, thank you so much for guiding us through this complex and fascinating history.
It was my pleasure.
Yeah.
The New Left story, it's a reminder that history is not just, a collection of dates and facts.
Yeah.
It's a living tapestry woven from the struggles and triumphs of those who came before us.
It's a good way to put it.
And by understanding their stories, I think we can gain a deeper understanding of our own place in the world and the challenges that we face.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yes, thank you.
We hope you found it insightful, thought-provoking.
Absolutely.
And maybe even a little bit inspiring.
Hopefully. Till next time.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.